Introduction. Havenwood. Even the name whispered a sense of melancholy, a hint of something lost and forgotten. Nestled deep in the heart of rural Maine, it was a town steeped in history, its past woven into the very fabric of its existence. But Havenwood carried a darker legacy, a secret buried beneath the veneer of small-town charm, a chilling tale whispered in hushed tones, a story of restless spirits and ancient rituals. Havenwood Cemetery, its rusted gates groaning like the death rattle of a forgotten soul, stood as a silent sentinel, guarding the secrets of the dead. The graveyard, overgrown and neglected, was a testament to the town's desire to forget its past, to bury the memories of the tragedies that had unfolded within its shadowed confines. But the past, as Havenwood would soon discover, refused to stay buried. For generations, the townsfolk had whispered stories of strange occurrences within the cemetery walls. Flickering lights, chilling whispers carried on the wind, and spectral figures glimpsed in the dead of night. They were dismissed as folklore, old wives' tales meant to frighten children, but a seed of unease remained, a prickle of fear that ran down the spine whenever one dared to venture too close to the graveyard gates. This is the story of Havenwood, a town haunted by its past, a town where the line between the living and the dead blurred, and where the opening of a forgotten gate unleashed a torrent of terror upon its unsuspecting inhabitants. It is a story of restless spirits seeking peace, of a town grappling with its dark secrets, and of the courage it took to confront the shadows that lurked within the heart of Havenwood Cemetery. It is a story that begins with a whisper. A whisper on the wind, a whisper from the grave, a whisper that would soon become a scream. Part 1. The Awakening. Chapter 1. Whispers in the Wind. The rusted iron gates of Havenwood Cemetery groaned like an old man complaining about the weather. Elias Thorne, local historian and amateur antiquarian, paused at the entrance, a shiver crawling down his spine, despite the warm June afternoon. He'd passed this place 100 times, but today was different. Today, he had a purpose. Havenwood was more than just an old graveyard. It was a repository of whispers, a place where the past clung to the present like cobwebs in a neglected attic. The cemetery had fallen into disrepair decades ago, the town council opting for a newer, tidier burial ground on the outskirts of town. Now, Havenwood was a tangle of overgrown weeds, tilting headstones and crumbling mausoleums, forgotten by all but the most persistent of weeds and the occasional vandal. Elias pushed the creaking gates inward, the sound echoing through. The stillness, like a rusty nail, dragged across a chalkboard. The air inside felt heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the dense canopy of ancient oaks, casting long, skeletal shadows that danced and twisted with the slightest breeze. He'd always been drawn to Havenwood, ever since he was a boy. The old folks in town whispered stories about the place, tales of restless spirits, strange lights, and unexplained sounds. Most dismissed them as folklore, but Elias had always felt a prickle of unease whenever he passed the rusted gates. Now, armed with a notebook, a camera, and a healthy dose of skepticism, he was finally going to delve into Havenwood's history. He'd spent weeks poring over old town records, newspaper clippings, and faded diaries, piecing together a fragmented picture of the cemetery's past. He'd learned about the founding families buried there, the epidemics that had filled its grounds, and the whispers of strange occurrences that had persisted for generations. A crow cawed from a nearby branch, its harsh cry breaking the silence. Elias glanced up, a sense of unease settling over him. He was alone, yet he felt a presence, a watchful awareness that prickled the hairs on the back of his neck. He shook off the feeling, attributing it to the overactive imagination of a man who'd spent too long immersed in ghost stories. He started his exploration, carefully navigating the uneven ground and overgrown pathways. He photographed the weathered headstones, transcribed the faded inscriptions, and noted the intricate carvings that hinted at the lives and beliefs of those buried beneath. As he moved deeper into the cemetery, the feeling of unease intensified. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper. He heard a faint rustling in the undergrowth, a whisper of movement that sent a shiver down his spine. He paused, listening intently, but the sound was gone. Elias continued his exploration, his curiosity. Battling with a growing sense of apprehension, he was determined to uncover the secrets of Havenwood, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that something ancient and unsettling was stirring within the forgotten graveyard. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the grounds, Elias knew it was time to leave. He paused at the gates, glancing back at the darkened cemetery. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a faint, mournful sigh. He couldn't be sure if it was his imagination, but he thought he heard a voice, a whisper on the wind, calling his name. With a final, unsettling glance back, Elias Thorne stepped out of Havenwood Cemetery, leaving the restless spirits to their secrets. He knew he would be back. He was already hooked, drawn into the mystery of the forgotten graveyard and the whispers that haunted its grounds. Chapter 2. The gates creak open. The moon hung fat and yellow in the inky sky, casting an eerie glow across Havenwood Cemetery. Jake, ever the daredevil, grinned at his friends, a flashlight beam dancing across his face. "Ah, come on, chicken shits," he taunted. "You're not scared, are you?" Sarah, ever the voice of reason, shifted nervously. "Jake, I don't know about this. My grandma told me stories about this place." Yeah, ghost stories," Jake scoffed. "Old wives' tales to scare kids. Tonight we're gonna see for ourselves." He brandished a battered Ouija board, its planchette worn smooth from countless teenage experiments. "Tonight, we talk to the dead." Beside Sarah, Mike fidgeted, clutching his own flashlight like a shield. "I heard old man Hemlock saw a light moving in there last week," he mumbled. "Said it was a ghost." "Probably just swamp gas," Jake retorted. "Look, it's simple. We sneak in, try the Ouija thing, get some thrills, and get out. No big deal." He pushed against the rusted gates. They groaned in protest, the sound amplified in the stillness of the night. A chill wind swept through the graveyard, rattling the branches of the ancient oaks like skeletal fingers. Even Jake felt a prickle of unease. They slipped inside, the darkness swallowing them whole. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something indefinable, something that made the hairs on their arms stand on end. They found a relatively clear spot near a crumbling mausoleum, its stone facade etched with indecipherable symbols. Jake spread out a blanket, and they huddled together, the flashlight beams creating a small circle of light in the vast darkness. "Okay," Jake said, his voice a little less confident now. "Let's do this." They placed their fingers on the planchette, the small triangular piece of wood that would supposedly guide their communication with the spirit world. Sarah, despite her apprehension, found herself drawn into the ritual, a mix of fear and morbid curiosity swirling within her. "Spirits," Jake intoned, trying to sound dramatic. "If you are here, move the planchette." Nothing happened. "Come on," Jake muttered, nudging the planchette. "Work your magic." Still nothing. They tried again and again, their laughter and bravado slowly fading as the silence stretched on. Then, just as they were about to give up, the planchette began to move, slowly at first, then faster, gliding across the board, spelling out letters. H-E-L-P, the planchette spelled. A collective gasp filled the air. Mike's flashlight slipped from his grasp, clattering to the ground and plunging them into near darkness. "Whoa," Jake breathed, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "That's weird." The planchette continued to move, spelling out a series of disjointed words and phrases. Trapped, angry, forgotten, open. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the graveyard, extinguishing their remaining flashlight. They were plunged into absolute darkness, the only sound the rustling of leaves and the frantic beating of their hearts. Then they heard it, a low, guttural moan that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath their feet. The gates. They were swinging open, slowly, deliberately, as if an unseen hand was pushing them wide. Panic seized them. They scrambled to their feet, stumbling through the darkness, desperate to escape. But the gates were open now, and something had changed. The air felt colder, heavier, charged with an unseen energy. They weren't just in a graveyard anymore, they were trapped. Something had been unleashed. As they fled, they could have sworn they heard whispers on the wind, voices calling their names, promising them a fate far worse than they could have ever imagined. The gates of Havenwood were open, and the restless spirits were free. Chapter 3. Restless Souls. The opening of the gates was a key turning in the lock of history, releasing the pent-up emotions and unfinished business of Havenwood's long-term residents. They weren't just wisps of ectoplasm or vague impressions. They were distinct personalities, each with their own story etched in the fabric of the cemetery. First, there was Sergeant Elias Thorne, no relation to the historian, a fact that would later prove chillingly ironic. He materialized near his weathered tombstone, a spectral figure still clad in his Union uniform, though the blue was faded and tattered, clinging to him like a second skin. His face, gaunt and etched with the weariness of war, held a haunted look. He wasn't interested in haunting. He simply wanted peace. The war, his war, was never over for him. It played out nightly in his spectral mind, the screams of the dying, the thunder of cannon fire, the gnawing fear, all as fresh as the day he fell. He wandered Havenwood, a lost soul searching for a way to lay down his burden. Then there was Eliza Blackwood, her spectral form shimmering with a cold fury. Murdered by her husband in a fit of jealous rage centuries ago, her spirit was consumed by a burning desire for revenge. She remembered the feel of his hands around her throat, the air choked from her lungs, the cold indifference in his eyes as her life ebbed away. Her spectral hand clenched and unclenched, phantom pain reminding her of the brutality she suffered. She roamed the cemetery, a vengeful spirit seeking the descendants of her killer. Her heart, or where her heart had been, a frozen shard of hatred. She wouldn't rest until she'd made them pay. And then there was little Emily Carter, a wisp of a girl with wide, sorrowful eyes. She had died of consumption as a child, her life cut tragically short. She didn't understand why she was still there in the cold, silent graveyard. All she knew was that she missed her mother's warm embrace, her father's gentle stories, the sound of her siblings' laughter. She wandered among the tombstones, a lost and lonely child searching for her family, her spectral hand reaching out for a connection she could no longer make. She was a whisper of innocence in a place of shadows, a poignant reminder of the lives cut short. These were just a few of the souls now freed from their long confinement. There was the old preacher, still offering sermons to an empty congregation, the heartbroken lover searching for his lost bride, the town drunk, still stumbling through the graveyard, rattling his spectral bottle. Each ghost had their own story, their own reason for lingering in Havenwood. And now, with the gates open, they were no longer confined to the cemetery grounds. They were free to roam Havenwood, their emotions, their desires, their unfinished business, spilling out into the unsuspecting town. The opening of the gates hadn't just released ghosts. It had unleashed a torrent of human emotion, raw and untamed. Chapter 4. First Encounters. The first signs were subtle, easily dismissed as an overactive imagination or a trick of the light. A whisper of a name on the wind, a cold spot in a warm room, a fleeting shadow in the corner of the eye. But as the days passed, the occurrences grew more frequent, more undeniable. Mrs. Girdling, the librarian, swore blind that books were flying off the shelves when her back was turned. Old Man Hemlock, notorious for his tall tales, claimed to have seen a spectral figure in his garden, a woman in a white gown weeping silently amongst the rose bushes. Even Mayor Perkins, a man of staunch pragmatism, reported a chilling encounter, a cold hand brushing his cheek in the dead of night, followed by a whisper of murderer that sent shivers down his spine. Elias Thorne, immersed in his research of Havenwood, felt the shift in the town's atmosphere. A palpable unease had settled over Havenwood, a prickling tension that tightened the nerves and shortened tempers. He noticed the townsfolk were more withdrawn, their smiles strained, their eyes filled with a haunted look. Even the normally bustling town square seemed quieter, the laughter of children replaced by an unsettling stillness. Meanwhile, Jake and his friends were experiencing the terrifying consequences of their actions firsthand. The bravado of that night in the graveyard had evaporated, replaced by a gnawing fear that clung to them like a shroud. Jake, haunted by the image of the gates swinging open, couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He saw shadows lurking in the corners of his room, heard whispers in the dead of night. His dreams were plagued by visions of spectral figures, their faces contorted in anger, their voices promising retribution. Sarah, more sensitive to the supernatural than she cared to admit, was bombarded by visions and sensations. She saw glimpses of the ghosts' past lives, felt their pain and anger, their longing and despair. She tried to ignore it, to dismiss it as her imagination, but the visions grew stronger, more vivid, until she couldn't deny the reality of what she was seeing. Mike, the most timid of the group, was reduced to a nervous wreck. He jumped at every creak and groan of his old house, convinced that every shadow held a lurking ghost. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything but the terror that gnawed at his soul. The teenagers, once eager for a thrill, were now trapped in a nightmare of their own making. They had opened the gates of Havenwood, and the restless spirits were coming for them. They were about to learn that some doors are best left closed, and some secrets are best left buried. Chapter 5. The Historian's Discovery. Elias Thorne, fueled by a potent mix of historical curiosity and growing dread, spent countless hours in the dusty archives of the Havenwood Historical Society. He sifted through brittle newspapers, faded photographs, and handwritten journals, his fingers tracing the fragile threads of Havenwood's past. He was searching for a key, something that would explain the unsettling shift in the town, the palpable sense of unease that had settled over Havenwood like a shroud. He found it, not in a grand historical document, but in the diary of a long-dead reverend, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the archives. Reverend Silas Blackwood, a chilling echo of Eliza's name, Havenwood's pastor in the late 1800s, wrote of a terrible tragedy that had befallen the town. A devastating fire, fueled by a careless act, had swept through Havenwood, claiming the lives of dozens of townspeople, including many children. But the fire, as Reverend Blackwood's diary revealed, was not the whole story. He wrote of a dark ritual performed by a desperate group of survivors, a desperate attempt to bring back their lost loved ones. They had sought out an ancient text, a forbidden book, whispered to contain the secrets of necromancy. Under the light of a blood-red moon, within the confines of Havenwood Cemetery, they performed the ritual, a twisted ceremony that called upon forces beyond their comprehension. The ritual, as the Reverend described it, involved the specific placement of 5 ancient stones around the cemetery gates, each stone representing one of the elements: earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. The gates themselves, he wrote, were not merely a barrier between the living and the dead, but a conduit, a doorway that could be opened with the right, or rather the wrong, incantation. The ritual had worked in a way. The dead had returned, but not as the grieving families had hoped. They came back as shadows, as echoes of their former selves, trapped between worlds, their emotions twisted and amplified by the dark magic that had called them forth. They were bound to Havenwood, their restlessness fueled by the unfinished business of their lives and the unnatural circumstances of their return. Reverend Blackwood, horrified by what he had witnessed, had attempted to undo the ritual. He'd learned the counter-incantation, the means to close the gates and send the spirits back to their rest. But he was never able to complete it. He died mysteriously, his diary ending abruptly, leaving the secret of the closing ritual incomplete. Elias felt a chill crawl down his spine as he read the Reverend's words. He finally understood. The fire, the ritual, the restless spirits, it all clicked into place. He knew now why Havenwood was haunted, why the town felt so heavy with sorrow and dread. But the diary had given him more than just an explanation. It had given him a clue. The 5 stones, the elemental symbols, the counter-incantation. It was a starting point, a thread to follow in the darkness. He knew he had to find those stones, decipher the Reverend's cryptic clues, and somehow complete the ritual. He had to close the gates of Havenwood before the restless spirits consumed the town entirely. Part 2. The Haunting. Chapter 6. A town gripped by fear. The haunting of Havenwood escalated, no longer confined to whispers and fleeting shadows. The spectral residents, their numbers bolstered by every restless soul buried within the cemetery gates, grew bolder, their interactions with the living taking on a malevolent edge. Their emotional turmoil, amplified by the botched ritual and their prolonged entrapment, manifested as physical phenomena, turning Havenwood into a waking nightmare. The temperature in town seemed to drop, a perpetual chill clinging to the air, even in the midday sun. Flowers withered and died, their vibrant colors replaced by a sickly gray. A thick fog rolled in, blanketing the town in an oppressive gloom, obscuring familiar landmarks and casting an eerie silence over the streets. Objects moved inexplicably. Chairs overturned in empty rooms, pictures flew off walls, and doors slammed shut with unseen force. The sounds of phantom footsteps echoed through empty houses, and disembodied voices whispered threats and accusations in the dead of night. The townsfolk, once skeptical, were now gripped by terror. They barricaded themselves in their homes, afraid to venture out after dark. Sleep became a luxury few could afford, haunted by nightmares of spectral figures and chilling whispers. The once vibrant community was fracturing, suspicion and paranoia poisoning their relationships. The ghosts, fueled by their own unresolved emotions, targeted individuals with specific connections to their past lives or those who reminded them of their pain. Eliza Blackwood, consumed by vengeance, tormented the descendants of her husband, leaving chilling messages scrawled on their walls in what appeared to be dried blood. Sergeant Elias Thorne, trapped in his wartime trauma, manifested as phantom gunfire and the screams of the dying, terrifying those who lived near the old battlefield on the edge of town. Little Emily Carter, longing for her family, appeared too. Children in their dreams, her sad eyes and plaintive cries for her mother leaving them waking up in cold sweats, their innocence shattered. The old preacher's sermons echoed through the empty church, his voice booming with condemnation, driving the current pastor to the brink of madness. Havenwood was no longer a town. It was a crucible of fear, where the boundaries between the living and the dead blurred, and the ghosts of the past held sway. The townsfolk were trapped in a waking nightmare, their lives unraveling as the haunting intensified, and the restless spirits exacted their toll. Chapter 7. The Psychic's Vision. Sarah, a woman with eyes that seemed to see beyond the veil of the ordinary, had always been different. In Havenwood, she was known as the quiet woman, the one who kept to herself, the one who sometimes spoke of things she couldn't possibly know. They whispered she was sensitive, a euphemism for odd. But Sarah knew the truth. She was a psychic, a conduit for the unseen world. And now, with the opening of the graveyard gates, her quiet life was about to be shattered. The influx of spirits was overwhelming. It was like a dam had burst, releasing a torrent of emotions, memories, and unfinished stories that crashed against her mind like a tidal wave. She saw them, the ghosts of Havenwood, not as wispy apparitions, but as they had been in life. The blacksmith with his calloused hands, the schoolteacher with her gentle smile, the farmer with his weathered face. She saw their deaths too, the moments of terror, pain, and confusion that had trapped them between worlds. Sarah's visions were vivid, visceral. She felt Eliza Blackwood's rage as her husband's hands tightened around her throat, the coldness of his eyes as her life flickered away. She experienced Sergeant Thorne's terror as he lay wounded on the battlefield, the screams of his comrades ringing in his ears, the smell of gunpowder burning his nostrils. She felt Emily Carter's heartbreaking longing for her mother's touch, the feverish heat of her small body as consumption claimed her young life. The visions weren't just images. They were emotions, raw and unfiltered. Sarah felt the ghosts' anger, their sorrow, their fear, their desperation. It was a cacophony of human experience, amplified and distorted by their spectral existence. She was drowning in their pain, her own sense of self, threatened by the overwhelming influx of their emotions. Sleep offered no respite. Her dreams were filled with fragmented memories, snippets of conversations, and glimpses of events from Havenwood's past. She saw the fire that had ravaged the town, the desperate faces of the survivors, the dark ritual performed under the blood-red moon. She heard the chanting, the incantations, the chilling whispers that had opened the gates. Sarah tried to shut it out, to block the visions and the voices, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. The spirits were relentless, their presence growing stronger with each passing day. They were reaching out to her, demanding her attention, needing her, to understand their stories, to help them find peace. She began to understand their unfinished business. Eliza needed justice. or at least some form of acknowledgement of the terrible wrong done to her. Sergeant Thorne needed to find a way to let go of the war, to forgive himself for the things he had done, the things he had seen. Emily needed to find her family, to connect with the love she had lost. Sarah was more than just a psychic. She was a bridge between the living and the dead. She was Havenwood's last hope, the only one who could understand the ghosts' plight and perhaps find a way to quiet their restless souls. But the question was, could she bear the weight of their pain? Or would she be consumed by the darkness that had been unleashed upon the town? Chapter 8. The Soldier's Plea. Sergeant Elias Thorne, a ghost trapped in the endless replay of his final battle, drifted through Havenwood Cemetery, a spectral figure lost in the fog of war. The screams of his fallen comrades echoed in his ears. The acrid smell of gunpowder burned his nostrils, and the ground beneath his feet trembled with the thunder of cannon fire. He was reliving it all, over and over again, a prisoner of his own traumatic memories. He wasn't aware of the town. Not really. He existed solely within the confines of that terrible day, that terrible moment. But something had shifted. The opening of the gates, the surge of supernatural energy had stirred something within him. A flicker of awareness, a break in the endless loop. He saw Elias Thorne, the historian, not as a Union soldier, but as something else. Someone who could perhaps understand. Elias, while researching the cemetery's history, found himself drawn to a particular grave. It was a simple, unmarked stone, almost hidden beneath a tangle of weeds. He felt a pull towards it, an inexplicable connection. As he cleared away the overgrowth, he noticed a small, tarnished silver locket lying half-buried in the earth. As Elias picked up the locket, a spectral figure materialized before him. Sergeant Thorne, his translucent form flickering in the dim light, stood there, his haunted eyes fixed on the locket. He reached out a spectral hand as if trying to grasp it, but his hand passed right through. That's mine, his voice rasped. A whisper carried on the wind. It was the first time he'd spoken in decades, perhaps centuries. Elias, startled but not afraid, felt a strange sense of empathy for the ghostly soldier. He recognized the pain in his eyes, the longing for peace. "Yours?" he asked softly. "Sergeant." Thorne nodded, his gaze still fixed on the locket. "It was a gift from my wife before the war." The words seemed to unlock a floodgate of memories, not just of the battle, but of his life before, a life of love and laughter, a life that had been stolen from him. I need it," he whispered, his voice filled with a desperate plea. "It's the only thing I have left." Elias understood. The locket wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a connection to the soldier's past, a tangible link to the life he had lost. It was a symbol of hope, of love, of peace. And perhaps, Elias thought, it was the key to freeing him from his torment. "I can't give it back," Elias explained gently. "Not in the way you mean, but perhaps I can help you find what you're looking for." Sergeant Thorne looked at him, his spectral eyes filled with a flicker of hope. "Help me." "I'm trying to understand what happened here," Elias said. "Why the spirits are so restless. I think this locket might be part of the answer." The soldier nodded slowly, his gaze returning to the locket. It's buried with her," he whispered. "My wife, she's buried here somewhere. I need to find her. I need to tell her. I need to tell her I'm sorry." Elias realized then that the soldier's torment wasn't just about the battle. It was about the guilt, the regret, the unfinished business of his life. He needed to find his wife, to find forgiveness, to find peace, and perhaps in helping him, Elias could also find a way to quiet the restless spirits of Havenwood. The locket, he suspected, was more than just a personal memento. It was a clue, a thread in the tangled web of Havenwood's past, a key to unlocking the secrets of the graveyard gates. Chapter 9. Revenge and Regret. Eliza Blackwood, a spectre of vengeance, drifted through the streets of Havenwood, her spectral form shimmering with a cold, ethereal light. The centuries had done little to quell the rage that burned within her, the memory of her murder, a festering wound that refused to heal. She sought retribution, her sights set on the descendants of the man who had brutally taken her life. She haunted their homes, a chilling presence that manifested as icy drafts, flickering lights, and disembodied whispers. She moved objects, slammed doors, and left chilling messages scrawled on their walls in what appeared to be dried blood. She wanted them to know her pain, to feel the terror she had felt in her final moments. But Eliza's quest for revenge was complicated by a growing sense of regret. In life, she had not been a saint. She had a temper, a sharp tongue, and a tendency to lash out when provoked. She had hurt people, said things she regretted, and made enemies. Now, as she haunted the living, she saw the consequences of her own actions, the ripple effects of her anger and bitterness. She saw the fear in the eyes of her victims, the families torn apart by suspicion and paranoia. She saw the town of Havenwood descending into chaos, the once vibrant community fracturing under the weight of the haunting, and she realized with a growing sense of horror that she was contributing to the darkness, perpetuating the cycle of pain and suffering. One night, as she watched a young mother cowering in fear, clutching her child to her breast, Eliza felt a pang of remorse. She saw herself in that mother, the fierce protectiveness, the love that burned bright even in the face of terror. And she remembered her own child, a sweet little girl taken too soon by illness, a loss that had fueled her own bitterness and anger. The memory of her daughter softened Eliza's heart, cracking the icy shell of vengeance that had encased her for so long. She saw the futility of her quest, the destructive path she was on. Revenge wouldn't bring back her daughter, wouldn't erase the pain of her own murder. It would only perpetuate the cycle of violence and suffering. Eliza began to question her motives, her purpose. Was she truly seeking justice, or was she simply indulging in her own anger and pain? Was she a victim, or was she becoming the monster she so despised? As the haunting intensified, Eliza found herself at a crossroads. She could continue down the path of vengeance, fueled by her rage and bitterness, or she could choose another, a way, a path of forgiveness and redemption. The choice, she realized, was hers to make. But could she let go of the past, embrace forgiveness, and find peace for herself and the town she was haunting? Chapter 10. The child's lost family, little Emily Carter, a spectral wisp of a girl, wandered through Havenwood, her translucent form flickering like a candle flame in a gentle breeze. She was lost, utterly and completely lost. She didn't understand why she was still here, in this place of shadows and whispers. All she knew was that she missed her mother's warm embrace, her father's bedtime stories, the sound of her siblings' laughter echoing through their small house. She drifted among the tombstones, her small spectral hand reaching out to touch the cold, unyielding stone, searching for a familiar name, a familiar face. She called out for her mother, her voice a faint whisper carried on the wind, but only the rustling leaves answered. She was a child, lost in a world she no longer understood, a world that seemed to have forgotten her. Sarah, her senses overwhelmed by the influx of restless spirits, felt a tug on her heart, a pang of empathy for the lost child. She saw Emily, not as a ghost, but as a little girl, confused and afraid, longing for the comfort of her family. Sarah knew she had to help her, to guide her through the confusing labyrinth of the afterlife. She approached Emily cautiously, her voice soft and gentle. "Emily," she whispered. The little girl turned, her wide, sorrowful eyes meeting Sarah's. Are you my mommy?" she asked, her voice filled with a heartbreaking hope. Sarah's heart ached. "No, sweetie," she said gently. "I'm Sarah. I'm here to help you." Emily looked at her, her brow furrowed in confusion. Help me find my mommy." Sarah nodded. "I can try," she said. "But, Emily, do you remember what happened? Do you remember being sick?" Emily shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't remember," she whispered. I just miss them. I miss my family." Sarah understood. Emily's memories were fragmented, clouded by the trauma of her death. She was trapped in a loop of longing, searching for a family she could no longer reach. "Your family? They're here, Emily," Sarah said gently. "They're here in Havenwood." Emily's eyes widened. "Here? Where?" She looked around, her small spectral form trembling with excitement. Are they over there?" She pointed towards a cluster of tombstones. Sarah hesitated. She didn't want to frighten Emily, but she knew she had to tell her the truth, gently, kindly. "They're here, Emily," she repeated. "But they're like you now. They're spirits." Emily looked at her, her eyes filled with confusion. "Spirits? Like me?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, sweetie, like you." Emily's face crumpled, and she began to cry, soft, heartbreaking sobs. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I just want my mommy." Sarah knelt beside her, her own eyes filling with tears. She understood. Emily's confusion, her longing, her pain. She knew that Emily needed to connect with her family, even if it was in the spectral realm. "I'll help you find them, Emily," she promised. "I'll help you find your family." And so, Sarah began to guide Emily through the labyrinth of Havenwood, searching for the Carter family plot, the place where Emily's parents and siblings lay buried. It was a journey of discovery, not just for Emily, but for Sarah as well. As she helped Emily reconnect with her lost family, Sarah began to understand the interconnectedness of the spirits, their shared longing for love, connection, and peace. She realized that helping Emily was not just an act of kindness. It was a step towards healing the wounds of Havenwood, quieting the restless spirits, and perhaps finding some peace for herself as well. Part 3. Shadows of the Past. Chapter 11. The Cemetery's Secrets. Elias Thorne, driven by the revelations in Reverend Blackwood's diary and the encounter with Sergeant Thorne, felt a renewed sense of urgency. He knew the key to quieting. The restless spirits lay within Havenwood Cemetery, hidden somewhere within its overgrown expanse. He returned to the graveyard, not just as a historian, but as a man on a mission. He started his search near the oldest section of the cemetery, where the founding families of Havenwood were buried. He reasoned that if the ritual had been performed by the town's early settlers, the artifacts associated with it would likely be hidden nearby. He meticulously examined the ancient headstones, the crumbling mausoleums, the gnarled trees that seemed to claw at the sky. He was looking for anything out of the ordinary, anything that might hint at a hidden chamber. Days turned into nights, and Elias continued his search, undeterred by the growing sense of unease that permeated the cemetery. He felt the presence of the spirits, their whispers carried on the wind, their shadows dancing in the periphery of his vision. He knew they were watching him, their spectral eyes following his every move. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the graveyard, Elias stumbled upon something unusual. Near the base of a large oak tree, its roots gnarled and twisted like skeletal fingers, he noticed a small, almost imperceptible depression in the earth. It was hidden beneath a thick layer of moss and decaying leaves, easily overlooked. He knelt down and carefully cleared away the debris, revealing a small, stone-covered opening. It looked like a root cellar or an old well, but something about it felt different, older, more sinister. He felt a coldness emanating from the opening, a palpable sense of dread that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He hesitated, a sense of foreboding washing over him. He knew this was it, the hidden chamber he had been searching for, but he also knew that whatever lay within was likely dangerous, something that had been buried for a reason. He took a deep breath and, using a small trowel he carried with him, carefully pried open the stone covering. A gust of cold, stale air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic, something that smelled of old blood. He shone his flashlight into the opening, revealing a narrow stone staircase leading down into the darkness. The air was thick with a palpable sense of evil, a weight that pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. He knew he should turn back, that he was venturing into something he might not be able to control. But the pull of the unknown, the need to understand the secrets of Havenwood, was too strong to resist. He took a tentative step down the stairs, the stone cold beneath his feet. The darkness swallowed him whole, the only light coming from his flashlight beam, cutting through the oppressive gloom. As he descended deeper into the earth, the whispers of the spirits grew louder, their voices swirling around him, warning him to turn back. But Elias pressed on, driven by a mixture of fear and determination, knowing that the fate of Havenwood, and perhaps his own soul, lay hidden within the secrets of the cemetery's dark chamber. Chapter 12. Jake's Guilt. The thrill of that night in Havenwood Cemetery had long since faded, replaced by a gnawing guilt that ate at Jake's insides. He saw the fear in the eyes of his classmates, the way the adults whispered about the strange occurrences, the palpable sense of dread that hung over the town like a shroud. He knew deep down that he was responsible. He had opened the gates, unleashed the horrors that now plagued Havenwood. Sleep offered no escape. His dreams were a replay of that night. The creaking gates, the chilling whispers, the sudden plunge into darkness. But now the dreams were more vivid, more terrifying. He saw the faces of the ghosts, their eyes burning with anger, their hands reaching out for him. He woke up screaming, his heart pounding, the image of the open gates seared into his mind. He tried to talk to his friends, to share the burden of his guilt, but they were just as scared as he was, their bravado replaced by a desperate need to survive. They had become targets too, haunted by their own encounters with the restless spirits. Sarah, usually so calm and collected, was now jumpy and paranoid, seeing shadows where there were none. She'd started having nightmares of her own, visions of the ghosts' past lives, their pain and suffering echoing in her dreams. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the ghosts were closing in. Mike, always the most timid of the group, was a shell of his former self. He barely spoke, his eyes wide with fear, darting around as if expecting a ghost to jump out at any moment. He'd taken to carrying a crucifix everywhere, clutching it like a lifeline. They tried to rationalize what was happening, to find a logical explanation for the strange occurrences. They researched local folklore, trying to find some way to undo what they had done. But the more they learned, the more they realized the gravity of their mistake. They hadn't just stumbled upon a spooky graveyard. They had unleashed something ancient, something powerful, something evil. Jake, despite his fear, felt a growing sense of responsibility. He knew he had to do something, anything, to make amends. He couldn't live with the guilt, the knowledge that he had condemned the town to this nightmare. He decided he had to go back to Havenwood, to face the ghosts, to try and find a way to close the gates. He knew it was dangerous, that the ghosts were angry and vengeful. But he also knew that he couldn't run away from his mistake. He had to face the consequences of his actions, to try and redeem himself, even if it meant risking his own life. He was no longer the thrill-seeking teenager. He was a young man, burdened by guilt, driven by a desperate need for redemption. He would go back to Havenwood, not for a thrill, but for atonement. Chapter 13. Sarah's connection. Sarah, overwhelmed by the influx of spectral energy and the haunting visions, found herself drawn to one ghost in particular, a woman named Eliza Blackwood. There was something about Eliza, a raw intensity, a palpable sense of pain that resonated with Sarah. She felt a strange connection to the vengeful spirit, a pull that she couldn't explain. As Sarah delved deeper into her visions, she began to piece together fragments of Eliza's life. She saw the beautiful young woman, full of life and love, then the chilling moment of betrayal, the brutal act that had snuffed out her life. She felt Eliza's rage, her thirst for revenge, but she also glimpsed the flicker of regret, the pain of a life cut short. One night, while researching Havenwood's history in the local library, Sarah stumbled upon a genealogy chart for the Blackwood family. Intrigued, she traced the lineage, following the branches of the family tree through generations. And then she saw it. Her own name, Sarah, nestled within the sprawling family tree, linked to the Blackwoods through a distant, forgotten branch. A chill ran down her spine. She was related to Eliza Blackwood, not a close relative, but a descendant, however distant. The connection was undeniable. The pull she had felt towards Eliza wasn't just empathy, it was something deeper, something familial. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She felt a wave of dizziness, her head swimming with the weight of the discovery. She had always felt like an outsider in Havenwood, a quiet observer of the town's history. Now she realized she was part of that history, inextricably linked to the very spirits that were haunting the town. The connection to Eliza explained so much. It explained the vividness of her visions, the intensity of the emotions she was experiencing. It explained the feeling of familiarity, the sense that she knew Eliza, not just as a ghost, but as a member of her own family. But the discovery also raised a host of new questions. What did it mean that she was related to Eliza? Was she destined to follow in her footsteps, to be consumed by the same anger and bitterness? Or was there another path, a way to break the cycle of pain and find redemption for her family's past? Sarah knew she had to learn more about the Blackwood family, about Eliza's life, about the circumstances surrounding her death. She needed to understand the roots of the curse that had plagued Havenwood for so long, the dark secret that had bound Eliza's spirit to the town. She felt a sense of responsibility, not just to the town, but to her own family, to Eliza. She knew she had to find a way to help Eliza find peace, to break the chain of vengeance that had haunted the Blackwood family for generations. And in doing so, she hoped she could also find peace for herself, and perhaps unravel the mystery of her own connection to the haunting of Havenwood. Chapter 14. The Artifact's Power. Deep within the hidden chamber beneath Havenwood Cemetery, Elias Thorne discovered not just the secrets of the past, but a tangible source of the present terror. Resting on a crumbling altar, bathed in an eerie green glow, was the artifact. A twisted obsidian skull, its eye sockets gleaming with an unnatural light. It pulsed with a dark energy, a palpable malevolence that resonated deep within Elias's bones. He recognized it instantly from Reverend Blackwood's diary, the focal point of the dark ritual, the conduit through which the spirits had been called forth. But the diary hadn't prepared him for the sheer power radiating from the object. It wasn't just an artifact, it was a power source, amplifying the ghost's already heightened emotions and abilities, turning them from restless spirits into something far more dangerous, far more unpredictable. As Elias cautiously approached the skull, he felt a surge of energy, a jolt that sent shivers down his spine. The air around him crackled with static, and the whispers of the ghosts grew louder, more insistent, swirling around him like a tempest. He saw flashes of their past lives, their pain, their anger, their desperation. He felt their presence, not just as whispers, but as a physical force pressing down on him, threatening to crush him. He realized with growing horror that the skull wasn't just a conduit. It was a prison, binding the spirits to Havenwood, fueling their rage, preventing them from finding peace. It was the key to their power, the source of the escalating haunting. As he reached out to touch the skull, a spectral figure materialized before him, Eliza Blackwood, her eyes burning with an unnatural light, her face contorted in a mask of rage. "You dare touch it?" she hissed, her voice a chilling whisper that echoed through the chamber. "It is ours." Other ghosts began to appear, drawn by the presence of the historian and the power of the artifact. Sergeant Thorne, his spectral form flickering with an unnatural energy, raised his ghostly rifle, aiming it at Elias. Little Emily Carter, her eyes wide with terror, clung to her mother's side, her small spectral hand reaching out to Elias, pleading with him to stop. Elias knew he was in grave danger. The ghosts, empowered by the skull, were far stronger than he had imagined. They were no longer just echoes of the past. They were a force of nature, driven by their amplified emotions, their power growing with each passing moment. He understood then that he couldn't just close the gates. He had to destroy the artifact. It was the only way to break the cycle of vengeance, to free the spirits from their torment, to save Havenwood from being consumed by the darkness. But destroying the skull wouldn't be easy. It was protected by the ghosts, their power amplified by the very object he sought to destroy. He was just one man, armed with his knowledge and his courage, facing an army of vengeful spirits empowered by a dark, ancient magic. The odds were stacked against him, but he knew he had to try. The fate of Havenwood and perhaps his own soul depended on it. Chapter 15. Confronting the past. Elias and Sarah, united by their shared connection to Havenwood's haunting and driven by the need to destroy the artifact, knew they had to delve deeper into the tragic event that had trapped the spirits. They realized that destroying the skull wasn't just about breaking a physical object. It was about confronting the emotional wounds, the unresolved traumas that had bound the ghosts to Havenwood for centuries. They returned to the archives, poring over Reverend Blackwood's diary, searching for any clues, any details that might shed light on the circumstances surrounding the fire and the subsequent ritual. They read accounts of the devastating blaze, the loss of life, the despair that had gripped the town. They learned about the families who had been torn apart, the lives that had been cut short, the grief that had festered and grown into something dark and malevolent. But the diary only told part of the story. To truly understand the ghost's plight, they needed to go beyond the written record to connect with the emotional residue, the lingering echoes of the past that still clung to Havenwood. Sarah, with her psychic abilities, became their guide, delving into the collective consciousness of the town, past and present. She saw visions of the fire, the flames licking at the wooden houses, the screams of the trapped, the frantic efforts of the survivors. She felt the terror, the panic, the overwhelming sense of loss. But she also saw more. She saw the desperation of the survivors, their willingness to do anything, even something terrible, to bring back their loved ones. She saw the influence of the ancient text, the forbidden knowledge that had corrupted their grief and twisted their love into something dark and unnatural. Elias, meanwhile, focused on the physical remnants of the past. He explored the ruins of the old town, searching for any clues that might have been overlooked. He examined the foundations of the burned houses, the remnants of personal belongings, the fragments of lives that had been shattered by the fire. He discovered a hidden cellar beneath the ruins of the old church, a place where the townspeople had gathered after the fire, seeking solace and guidance from Reverend Blackwood. It was there, amidst the charred remains of religious icons and the faint scent of incense, that they found a hidden compartment containing a collection of personal letters written by the victims of the fire in their final moments. The letters were heartbreaking, filled with love, regret, and unfinished business. They spoke of dreams deferred, promises broken, and apologies left unsaid. They revealed the hopes and fears of the people who had perished in the fire, their deepest desires, their greatest regrets. As Elias and Sarah read the letters, they began to understand the true nature of the ghost's entrapment. It wasn't just about the ritual or the artifact or the open gates. It was about the emotional baggage, the unresolved issues, the unfinished stories that had bound them to Havenwood. They realized that destroying the artifact was just the first step. To truly quiet the restless spirits, they had to confront the past, to acknowledge the pain and suffering that had been inflicted, to offer some form of reconciliation, some semblance of closure. They had to become mediators between the living and the dead, helping the ghosts to let go of their earthly burdens and find peace in the afterlife. It was a daunting task, a journey into the heart of Havenwood's darkness, but they knew it was the only way forward. Part 4. The Reckoning. Chapter 16. The Ghost's Uprising. The obsidian skull, pulsing with malevolent energy, acted as a catalyst, igniting the already volatile emotions of Havenwood's restless spirits. Their anger, their pain, their frustration at being trapped between worlds for so long, amplified by the artifact's dark magic, surged to the surface, manifesting in increasingly terrifying ways. The haunting escalated, no longer a series of unsettling occurrences, but a full-blown spectral uprising. The ghosts, no longer bound by the limitations of their spectral forms, began to exert a more direct influence on the physical world. Objects didn't just move. They flew across rooms with violent force, shattering against walls. Doors didn't just slam, they splintered and broke, leaving gaping holes in the fabric of homes. The very air crackled with an unnatural energy, a palpable sense of menace that clung to the town like a suffocating blanket. Eliza Blackwood, her rage fueled by the artifact's power, became a whirlwind of spectral fury. She targeted the descendants of her murderer with relentless vengeance, her ghostly form appearing in their bedrooms at night, whispering threats and promises of retribution. She manipulated the environment around them, turning their homes into traps, their possessions into weapons. One family found their antique mirror reflecting not their own images, but Eliza's contorted face, her eyes burning with hatred. Another awoke to find their beds levitating above the floor, suspended precariously in midair. Sergeant Elias Thorne, his battlefield trauma magnified by the artifact, manifested as a terrifying phantom soldier, leading a spectral charge through the streets of Havenwood. The sounds of phantom gunfire echoed through the night, accompanied by the screams of dying men. Those who lived near the old battlefield experienced the full horror of the sergeant's eternal torment, their homes transformed into a ghostly war zone. They saw spectral soldiers marching through their living rooms, heard the cries of the wounded echoing from their attics, and felt the chilling presence of death in every corner of their homes. Little Emily Carter, though her spirit remained childlike and innocent, became a conduit for the artifact's power, her presence causing strange and unsettling phenomena. Toys in children's bedrooms came to life, moving on their own, their innocent play twisted into something sinister. Whispers of nursery rhymes turned into chilling chants, and shadows danced on the walls, taking on grotesque shapes. Children, once the most innocent members of the community, were now terrified, their dreams haunted by Emily's sad, pleading eyes. The other ghosts of Havenwood, emboldened by the artifact's power, joined the uprising, each manifesting their own unique brand of terror. The old preacher's sermons became a chorus of condemnation, booming through the town square, accusing the living of their sins. The heartbroken lover's mournful cries echoed through the streets, filling the air with a palpable sense of loss. The town-drunk's spectral stumbling caused objects to fall from shelves, creating a cacophony of noise that drove the townsfolk to the brink of madness. Havenwood was under siege, not by an invading army, but by an army of ghosts. Their power, amplified by the dark magic of the obsidian skull, The townspeople, trapped in their homes, were at the mercy of the restless spirits, their fear growing with each passing night, their hope dwindling with each terrifying encounter. The ghosts of Havenwood had risen, and their wrath was terrifying to behold. Chapter 17. The Town's Despair. The spectral uprising plunged Havenwood into the depths of despair. Fear, a living, breathing entity, stalked the streets, whispering insidious suggestions into the ears of the townsfolk. Sleep offered no respite, only a continuation of the waking nightmares, the chilling encounters with the increasingly malevolent ghosts. The once close-knit community began to unravel, the bonds of friendship and neighborly trust fraying under the strain of constant terror. The constant dread eroded their sense of security, their ability to trust. Every creak in the floorboards, every rustle of leaves, every shadow cast by the moonlight was interpreted as a sign of the ghost's presence. Neighbors eyed each other with suspicion, wondering if their friends, their family, even their own spouses might be possessed, might be the next target of the vengeful spirits. Paranoia took root, twisting ordinary events into sinister omens. A sudden illness was no longer just a sickness. It was a curse, a sign of the ghost's displeasure. A string of bad luck was no longer just chance. It was a targeted attack, a sign that the spirits were closing in. Whispers replaced conversations, smiles became strained, and eyes held a haunted, fearful glint. The townspeople, trapped in their homes, turned on each other, their fear fueling accusations and blame. Old grievances resurfaced. Petty arguments escalated into bitter feuds, and long-held resentments boiled over into open hostility. Families were torn apart by suspicion, friends became enemies, and the once vibrant community descended into a state of near anarchy. The local store, once a hub of social interaction, became a battleground for scarce resources. People hoarded food and supplies, fearing a prolonged siege by the ghosts. Neighbors barricaded their doors, refusing to help those in need, their fear outweighing their compassion. The sense of community, the shared experience of living in Havenwood, was replaced by a desperate struggle for individual survival. Even the church, usually a sanctuary of hope and comfort, offered little solace. Father Michael, struggling with his own faith in the face of such overwhelming darkness, found himself unable to offer the comfort his parishioners craved. His sermons, once a source of strength, now echoed with a hollow despair, reflecting the hopelessness that had gripped the town. Havenwood had become a microcosm of human frailty, a place where fear had stripped away the veneer of civility, revealing the darker aspects of human nature. The ghosts, in their torment and anger, had not only terrorized the living, they had also turned them against each other. The true horror of Havenwood wasn't just the supernatural threat, it was the way that fear had eroded the town's soul, leaving behind a community consumed by suspicion, paranoia, and despair. The spirits had not only haunted their homes, they had haunted their hearts. Chapter 18. The Priest's Dilemma. Father Michael, the parish priest of Havenwood, had always been a man of unwavering faith. He had dedicated his life to serving God and his community, finding solace and strength in his belief. But the supernatural events that had engulfed Havenwood were shaking the very foundations of his faith, forcing him to confront doubts he had never dared to entertain. He had always believed in the power of prayer, in the protection afforded by divine grace. He had comforted the grieving, offered solace to the troubled, and preached the gospel with unwavering conviction. But now, as he witnessed the terrifying manifestations of the restless spirits, he felt a growing sense of helplessness. His prayers seemed to go unanswered, his blessings offered no protection, and the comforting words of Scripture rang hollow in the face of such overwhelming darkness. He had seen the fear in his parishioners' eyes, the desperation in their voices as they sought his guidance, his comfort. They looked to him for answers, for reassurance that God would protect them from the spectral terror that haunted their town. But Father Michael found himself struggling to offer that reassurance, his own faith wavering in the face of the supernatural onslaught. He questioned everything he had ever believed. Was the devil truly at work in Havenwood, testing the faith of its inhabitants? Or was there some other explanation, some natural phenomenon that defied his understanding? He wrestled with the possibility that the ghosts were not malevolent entities, but simply lost souls, trapped between worlds, seeking help rather than vengeance. He tried to reconcile the teachings of his faith with the reality of what he was witnessing. He searched the Scriptures for answers, for guidance, but the words seemed to offer little comfort. The stories of miracles and divine intervention felt distant, almost mythical, compared to the very real and terrifying presence of the ghosts. He felt a growing sense of inadequacy, a feeling that he was failing his community, failing God. He was supposed to be a beacon of hope, a source of strength, but he felt lost and adrift, his own faith shaken to its core. He questioned whether he was worthy to lead his flock, whether he could offer them any real protection from the supernatural forces that threatened to consume them. The weight of his doubt bore down on him, threatening to crush him. He felt isolated, alone in his struggle, unsure of where to turn for guidance. He prayed for clarity, for a sign, for some indication that his faith was not misplaced. But the silence was deafening, broken only by the chilling whispers of the restless spirits. Father Michael was caught in a crisis of faith, a battle between his unwavering belief and the terrifying reality unfolding around him. He questioned whether he could truly help his community, whether he could offer them any real hope in the face of such overwhelming darkness. He was a priest struggling with his faith, a shepherd unsure of how to protect his flock from the wolves that had descended upon Havenwood. Chapter 19. Jake's Sacrifice. Jake, once the thrill-seeking teenager, was now a young man burdened by guilt. The weight of his actions, the knowledge that he had unleashed the spectral terror upon Havenwood, pressed down on him, suffocating him. He saw the fear in the eyes of his friends, the despair etched on the faces of the townspeople. He knew he had to do something, anything, to make amends. He couldn't erase what he had done, couldn't rewind time and undo the botched seance that had opened the graveyard gates. But he could try to fix it, to atone for his mistake, even if it meant risking his own life. He decided he had to confront the ghosts, to face the very entities he had unleashed upon the town. He knew it was a dangerous, perhaps even suicidal mission. The ghosts were powerful, their anger amplified by the dark artifact, their presence a chilling force that permeated every corner of Havenwood. But Jake felt a strange sense of resolve, a quiet determination born out of guilt and a desperate need for redemption. He told Sarah and Mike about his plan. They tried to dissuade him, their fear for his safety outweighing their own desire for an end to the haunting. They argued, pleaded, even threatened to tell the adults, but Jake was adamant. He wouldn't be swayed. This was his responsibility, his penance. He knew he couldn't face the ghosts alone. He needed information, a plan, some way to understand the spectral forces he was about to confront. He went to Elias Thorne, the historian, seeking his knowledge of Havenwood's past, any clues about the ghosts' weaknesses, any way to close the gates. Elias, seeing the genuine remorse in Jake's eyes, the transformation from a reckless youth to a man driven by purpose, decided to help. He shared his research, the details of the ritual, the significance of the artifact, the potential ways to appease the spirits. He warned Jake of the dangers, the power of the ghosts, the risk of facing them directly. But Jake was undeterred, armed. With Elias's knowledge and a heart heavy with guilt, Jake prepared to return to Havenwood Cemetery. He knew he was walking into the heart of the darkness, facing a force that could easily destroy him. But he also knew he had to try. He had to do something to stop the haunting, to save the town he had inadvertently condemned. He wasn't just a teenager anymore. He was a young man making a difficult choice, a dangerous sacrifice. He was going back to Havenwood, not for a thrill, but for redemption. He was ready to face the ghosts, to confront his past, to risk everything for a chance to make things right. He knew the odds were stacked against him, but he also knew he couldn't live with the guilt if he didn't try. His sacrifice, he hoped, might be the key to Havenwood's salvation. Chapter 20. The Battle for Havenwood. The final confrontation took place in the heart of Havenwood Cemetery, under the pale glow of a moon shrouded by storm clouds. Elias, Sarah, and Father Michael stood together, a small band of hope against the overwhelming spectral force that had gripped the town. They were an unlikely alliance, a historian, a psychic, and a priest. But they were united by a common purpose, to close the gates, to quiet the restless spirits, to save Havenwood from the encroaching darkness. Jake, driven by his own need for redemption, had already ventured into the cemetery, attempting to distract the ghosts, to draw their attention away from the others. He was a lone figure, a lamb offered to the wolves, his courage a desperate gamble. Elias focused on the ancient stones surrounding the cemetery gates, the elemental markers that Reverend Blackwood had described in his diary. He knew they had to be repositioned, their energy realigned, to reverse the ritual that had opened the gates. But the ghosts, empowered by the obsidian skull, were fiercely protective of their prison, their power source. Sarah, her psychic senses heightened by the proximity to the artifact, felt the ghosts' rage, their desperation to protect their spectral existence. She guided Elias, warning him of their movements, their attacks, their attempts to disrupt the ritual. She acted as a conduit, channeling her own energy to counteract the dark magic emanating from the skull. Father Michael, his faith renewed by the courage he witnessed in Jake and the unwavering determination of Elias and Sarah, stood as a bulwark against the spiritual onslaught. He recited ancient prayers, invoking divine protection, his voice echoing through the cemetery, a challenge to the malevolent forces that held sway. He was a beacon of light against the encroaching darkness, his faith a shield against the ghosts' amplified power. The ghosts attacked relentlessly. Eliza Blackwood, her spectral form shimmering with fury, lunged at Sarah, her touch icy cold, threatening to freeze her very soul. Sergeant Thorne, leading a phantom charge, fired spectral bullets at Elias, the sounds of phantom gunfire echoing through the graveyard. Little Emily, her innocent face contorted by the artifact's influence, manifested as a series of terrifying illusions, attempting to distract and disorient the trio. The battle raged, a clash between the living and the dead, between faith and despair, between hope and terror. Elias, guided by Sarah's visions, struggled to reposition the stones, each movement a battle against the ghost's interference. Father Michael, his voice hoarse from constant prayer, fought to maintain his focus, to keep the light of his faith burning bright. Jake, though terrified, played his part, drawing the ghost's attention, leading them on a chase through the cemetery. He used his knowledge of the grounds, his agility, his sheer desperation to evade their attacks, giving Elias, Sarah, and Father Michael the precious time they needed. The obsidian skull, perched on its altar, pulsed with malevolent energy, its power radiating outwards, fueling the ghost's fury. It was the heart of the darkness, the source of their power, the key to their continued existence. Elias knew that if they were to succeed, they had to destroy the skull, to sever the connection between the spirits and their earthly prison. The climax arrived as Elias finally managed to reposition the last stone. Sarah, channeling all her psychic energy, focused on the skull, attempting to disrupt its power, to weaken its hold on the ghosts. Father Michael, his voice filled with unwavering faith, recited the final words of the counter-incantation, the ritual to close the gates. The cemetery gates began to tremble, the rusted iron groaning in protest. The ghosts, sensing their impending, returned to the spectral realm, lashed out with renewed ferocity, their anger and desperation reaching a fever pitch. But it was too late. The ritual was complete. The gates were closing. Part 5. Closure. Chapter 21. The Ritual Revisited. With the knowledge gleaned from Reverend Blackwood's diary and the harrowing experience of the first attempt, Elias and Sarah prepared to perform the closing ritual again. They knew the stakes were higher now. The ghosts, having tasted freedom and power, would not relinquish their hold on the living world easily. They were aware of Elias and Sarah's intentions, their spectral forms radiating a palpable sense of menace. The cemetery itself seemed to hold its breath, the ancient trees whispering warnings in the wind, the very ground beneath their feet vibrating with an unsettling energy. The air was thick with a chilling tension, the silence broken only by the frantic beating of Elias and Sarah's hearts. They began the ritual under the pale light of a waning moon. The 5 elemental stones placed carefully around the gates, their surfaces glowing faintly with an ethereal light. Elias, his voice trembling slightly, began to recite the counter-incantation, the ancient words echoing through the stillness of the graveyard. But the ghosts were ready. They materialized around Elias and Sarah, their spectral forms flickering and shifting in the darkness. Eliza Blackwood, her eyes burning with icy fury, lunged at Sarah, her touch like a blast of Arctic air. "You will not take away our power," she hissed, her voice a chilling whisper that cut through the night. Sergeant Thorne, leading a spectral charge, materialized phantom soldiers, their ghostly bayonets glinting in the moonlight. They charged at Elias, their spectral forms passing through him, leaving him feeling cold and weak, sapping his strength. Little Emily, her innocent face twisted by the artifact's influence, conjured illusions, playing on Elias and Sarah's deepest fears. They saw loved ones beckoning them from beyond the grave, heard their voices whispering promises of reunion. It was a cruel trick, designed to distract them, to break their concentration, to lure them away from the ritual. The other ghosts of Havenwood joined the attack, each manifesting their own unique form of torment. The old preacher's voice boomed through the graveyard, condemning them as sinners, threatening them with eternal damnation. The heartbroken lovers' mournful cries echoed through the night, filling their hearts with a sense of unbearable loss. Elias struggled to maintain his focus, to continue reciting the incantation. The ghosts' attacks were relentless, their power amplified by the dark energy emanating from the obsidian skull. He stumbled, his voice faltering, the ancient words threatening to dissolve into the night air. Sarah, fighting off Eliza's icy grip, focused her psychic powers on the elemental stones, attempting to amplify their energy, to create a protective barrier against the ghosts' onslaught. She felt their anger, their desperation, their fear of being returned to the spectral realm. She knew that if she faltered, if she lost her concentration, they would be overwhelmed. The ghosts were growing. Bolder, their attacks more frequent, more intense. They were desperate to stop the ritual, to maintain their hold on the living world. The fate of Havenwood hung in the balance, resting on the courage and determination of 2 individuals facing an army of vengeful spirits. The ritual was a delicate dance between hope and despair, a battle against the forces of darkness, a desperate attempt to reclaim the town from the clutches of the restless dead. Chapter 22. The Artifact's Destruction. The obsidian skull, perched atop its altar in the hidden chamber beneath Havenwood Cemetery, pulsed with malevolent energy. The source of the ghosts' amplified power, their rage, their desperate fight to remain in the world of the living. Elias and Sarah knew that closing the gates wasn't enough. As long as the skull existed, the threat remained. It had to be destroyed. They descended into the chamber, the air thick with a palpable sense of evil, the whispers of the ghosts swirling around them like a vortex. The skull seemed to throb, its obsidian surface gleaming with an unholy light, as if it were aware of their intentions. The ghosts, sensing the threat to their power source, materialized around them, their spectral forms contorted with fury. Eliza Blackwood, her eyes burning with icy hatred, lunged at Sarah, her touch like a freezing blast. "You will not destroy what is ours!" she shrieked, her voice a chilling whisper that echoed through the chamber. Sergeant Thorne, leading a spectral charge, materialized phantom soldiers, their ghostly bayonets glinting in the dim light. They charged at Elias, their spectral forms passing through him, leaving him feeling cold and weak, sapping his strength. Little Emily, her innocent face twisted by the artifact's influence, conjured terrifying illusions, playing on Elias and Sarah's deepest fears. They saw loved ones beckoning them from beyond the grave, heard their voices whispering promises of reunion. It was a cruel trick, designed to distract them, to break their concentration, to lure them away from their purpose. The other ghosts of Havenwood joined the attack, each manifesting their own unique form of torment. The old preacher's voice boomed through the chamber, condemning them as sinners, threatening them with eternal damnation. The heartbroken lovers' mournful cries echoed through the chamber, filling their hearts with a sense of unbearable loss. Elias and Sarah fought back, their determination fueled by the knowledge that the fate of Havenwood rested on their shoulders. Elias, drawing strength from deep within, dodged and weaved through the spectral attacks, focusing on the skull, the source of the ghost's power. He knew he had to reach it, to destroy it, before the ghosts overwhelmed them. Sarah, channeling her psychic powers, created a protective barrier around them, deflecting the ghosts' attacks, giving Elias the time he needed. She felt their anger, their desperation, their fear of losing their connection to the living world. She knew they would stop at nothing to protect the skull. The battle raged, a chaotic dance between the living and the dead, a desperate struggle against the forces of darkness. Elias, finally reaching the altar, raised his hand, a heavy stone he had found earlier clutched in his grip. He hesitated for a moment, knowing that this one blow could determine the fate of Havenwood. He brought the stone down with all his might, smashing the obsidian skull. A shockwave of energy erupted from the shattered artifact, throwing the ghosts back, their forms flickering and dissolving. The chamber was plunged into darkness for a moment, the silence broken only by the ragged breathing of Elias and Sarah. Then slowly the light returned. The obsidian skull was gone, reduced to fragments of black glass scattered across the altar. The ghosts, their power source destroyed, began to fade, their forms becoming less distinct, their voices fading into whispers. The malevolent energy, that had filled the chamber dissipated, replaced by a sense of peace. The battle was over. The artifact was destroyed. Chapter 23. The Spirit's Peace. The destruction of the obsidian skull was like a key turning in a lock, releasing not just the trapped energy, but also the trapped emotions of Havenwood's restless spirits. The ghosts, no longer fueled by the artifact's dark magic, began to change. Their anger, their rage, their thirst for vengeance began to subside, replaced by a sense of understanding. Their unfinished business, the emotional baggage that had kept them tethered to the earthly realm, began to resolve itself. Eliza Blackwood, her spectral form flickering and fading, looked at Sarah, not with hatred, but with a flicker of recognition, a hint of gratitude. The rage that had consumed her for centuries began to dissipate, replaced by a profound sadness, a regret for the life she had lost, the choices she had made. She saw the futility of her vengeance, the pain she had inflicted on others, the cycle of suffering she had perpetuated. With a final, lingering look at Sarah, a look that seemed to convey forgiveness and a plea for understanding, Eliza's form dissolved into the night air, finally finding the peace that had eluded her for so long. Sergeant Elias Thorne, his battlefield. Trauma, no longer a constant replay in his spectral mind, found a measure of solace. The weight of his guilt, the memories of the war began to lessen, replaced by a sense of acceptance. He saw the locket, the symbol of his lost love, lying on the ground near his unmarked grave. He reached for it, his spectral hand passing through it, but this time, there was no longing, no desperation. He understood that the locket was just a reminder, a symbol of the love he had shared, a love that transcended the boundaries of life and death. He looked at Elias, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes, and then, with a peaceful sigh, he faded away, his spirit finally released from the torment of the past. Little Emily Carter, her innocent face no longer contorted by the artifact's influence, looked around the cemetery, her eyes filled with a newfound understanding. She saw her parents, their spectral forms waiting for her, their arms outstretched. She ran to them, her small spectral form glowing with joy, and they embraced. A family, reunited in the spectral realm. The sadness that had haunted her eyes was gone, replaced by a radiant peace. Not all the ghosts of Havenwood found immediate peace. Some lingered, their unfinished business more complex, their emotional wounds deeper. But the destruction of the artifact had broken the cycle of negativity, had opened a path towards healing. The ghosts, no longer driven by their amplified emotions, were now free to confront their pasts, to resolve their earthly ties, to find their own path to peace. The cemetery, once a place of fear and torment, began to feel different, lighter. The oppressive atmosphere replaced by a sense of quietude, a hint of hope. The spirits were finding their way home, wherever that may be. Chapter 24. Havenwood's Healing. The departure of the restless spirits left a void in Havenwood, a silence that was both welcome and unsettling. The oppressive atmosphere that had clung to the town like a shroud began to lift, replaced by a tentative sense of calm. The fog that had shrouded the streets for weeks dissipated, revealing the familiar landmarks, the comforting sight of the sun shining on the weathered houses. The chill that had permeated the air began to thaw, replaced by the warmth of a summer breeze. The townspeople emerged from their homes, blinking in the sunlight, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. They had survived the spectral siege, had faced the terrors of the haunting, and had emerged, battered but not broken. The fear that had gripped them began to recede, replaced by a cautious optimism, a sense that perhaps, finally, they could begin to rebuild their lives. But the healing process was slow, and the scars of the haunting ran deep. The trauma of the past weeks had left its mark on the town, a lingering unease that clung to the edges of their consciousness. The whispers of the ghosts were gone, but the memory of their presence remained, a chilling reminder of the darkness that had once engulfed Havenwood. The once vibrant community was now fractured, the bonds of trust broken by the paranoia and suspicion that had taken root during the haunting. Neighbors eyed each other with a lingering unease, unsure if the fear was truly gone, if the ghosts had truly departed. The laughter of children, once a common sound in the streets, was now a rare and precious thing, a sign that the innocence of the town was slowly returning. The houses, once havens of safety and comfort, now held a chilling echo of the spectral presence. Every creak in the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, every shadow cast by the moonlight was a trigger, a reminder of the terror they had endured. Sleep offered little respite, their dreams haunted by fragmented images of the ghosts there, whispers echoing in the silence of the night. The townspeople tried to return to their normal routines, to rebuild their shattered lives. But nothing was quite the same. The haunting had changed them, had stripped away their sense of security, had forced them to confront the fragility of life and the existence of forces beyond their understanding. Father Michael, his faith tested and strengthened by the ordeal, offered solace and guidance to his flock. He spoke of forgiveness, of healing, of the power of community to overcome even the darkest of times. He reminded them that even in the face of terror, the light of hope could still prevail. Elias Thorne, his research finally complete, became a local hero, the man who had unlocked the secrets of Havenwood's past, the one who had helped to quiet the restless spirits. But he carried the weight of his knowledge, the understanding of the dark forces that lay dormant beneath the surface of the ordinary world. Sarah, her psychic abilities now recognized and respected, became a bridge between the living and the dead, a conduit for those who still sought closure, those who still needed to find peace. She helped them connect with their lost loved ones, to resolve their unfinished business, to find their own path to healing. Havenwood was healing, slowly, painfully, but surely. The scars remained, a reminder of the haunting, but they were also a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to endure even the most terrifying of ordeals. The town would never be quite the same, but it was alive, and it was learning to heal, to rebuild, to remember, and to hope. Chapter 25. The gates remain closed. For now, the rusted iron gates of Havenwood Cemetery, once creaking and groaning in their torment, now stood silent, still. The heavy chains, newly forged and blessed by Father Michael, held them firmly. In place, a symbolic barrier between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The elemental stones, cleansed of the dark energy that had corrupted them, lay undisturbed in their designated places, a silent testament to the ritual that had finally quieted the restless spirits. Havenwood had found a measure of peace, a respite from the spectral terror that had gripped the town for so long. The ghosts were gone, their chilling whispers no longer echoing through the streets, their terrifying apparitions no longer haunting the homes of the living. The townspeople had begun to rebuild their lives, to heal from the trauma they had endured. But a lingering unease remained, a subtle tremor in the fabric of Havenwood that hinted that the peace might be fragile, temporary. The memory of the haunting was still fresh, a chilling reminder of the power of the supernatural, the darkness that lay just beneath the surface of the ordinary world. Elias Thorne, standing before the closed gates, felt a prickle of unease, a sense that something was still unresolved. He knew that the destruction of the obsidian skull had weakened the ghosts, had allowed them to find peace, but he also knew that the connection between the living and the dead was not entirely severed. The gates were closed, but they were not impenetrable. Sarah, her psychic senses still attuned to the spectral realm, felt a faint echo of the ghost's presence, a lingering resonance that suggested they were not entirely at rest. She sensed a quiet waiting, a patient stillness that hinted at a future awakening. The spirits of Havenwood had found a measure of peace, but their stories were not yet fully told, their connection to the town not yet fully broken. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the silent graveyard, a cold wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it a faint, chilling whisper, a reminder of the ghost's presence. It was a subtle message, a hint of future disturbances, a promise that the secrets of Havenwood were not yet fully revealed. The final scene lingered on the cemetery gates, closed but not forgotten. The camera slowly panned across the graveyard, focusing on the weathered headstones, the silent witnesses to the town's history. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves, creating the illusion of whispers. The image faded to black, leaving the audience with a sense of unease, a feeling that the peace was tenuous, that the darkness might return. The final words appeared on the screen, a chilling reminder: the gates remain closed for now. The story of Havenwood was over for now, but the potential for future hauntings remained. Perhaps a new generation, unaware of the town's dark history, would stumble upon the secrets of Havenwood, would inadvertently open the gates once more, unleashing the restless spirits upon the unsuspecting town. The cycle of terror, it seemed, might be broken, but it was not yet over. The ghosts of Havenwood were waiting, their stories lingering in the shadows, their presence a chilling reminder that some doors are best left closed and some secrets are best left buried. But secrets, like ghosts, have a way of resurfacing. Epilogue years had passed since the haunting of Havenwood. The town had slowly healed, the physical scars fading, replaced by new houses, new businesses, new families. The emotional scars, however, remained, etched into the collective memory of the community. The stories of the ghosts, once whispered in hushed tones, had become local legends, cautionary tales told to children around campfires, reminders of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the ordinary world. The cemetery gates remained closed, the heavy chains a constant reminder of the terror that had once gripped the town. Havenwood had tried to move on, to forget the nightmare, but the memory of the restless spirits lingered, a chilling undercurrent beneath the town's newfound peace. Elias Thorne, his research complete, had moved away from Havenwood, seeking a quiet life, a respite from the supernatural encounters that had defined his recent years. He had written a book about the haunting, a factual account of the events, a warning to those who might be tempted to disturb the delicate balance between the living and the dead. The book became a local bestseller, a chilling reminder of Havenwood's dark history. Sarah, her psychic abilities now honed and refined, remained in Havenwood, a bridge between the living and the spectral realm. She helped those who still struggled with the trauma of the haunting, offering guidance and support. She also served as a guardian of sorts, sensing any disturbances in the spiritual realm, any hint of a resurgence of the restless spirits. Father Michael, his faith strengthened by the ordeal, continued to serve his community, offering solace and hope to those who still struggled with the memory of the haunting. He spoke of forgiveness, of healing, of the power of faith to overcome even the darkest of times. He reminded his parishioners that even in the face of terror, the light of hope could still prevail. Jake, the teenager who had inadvertently opened the gates, had left Havenwood, seeking a fresh start, a chance to escape the shadow of his past. He carried the guilt of his actions, a burden that he would likely carry for the rest of his life. But he also carried the memory of his redemption, the knowledge that he had played a part in saving the town, in quieting the restless spirits. Havenwood had changed. The town was quieter, more subdued. The laughter of children seemed less frequent, replaced by a sense of cautious peace. The residents carried a collective memory, a shared experience of terror and loss, but also of resilience and hope. They knew that the darkness could return, that the gates could be opened again, that the restless spirits might one day rise again. But they also knew that they had faced the darkness before, and they had survived. And if the ghosts of Havenwood were to rise again, a new generation would be ready to face them, armed with the knowledge of the past and the hope for a peaceful future. The gates remained closed, for now. But in Havenwood, for now, was a fragile thing. A promise whispered on the wind, a hope held gently in the heart. The town knew that the secrets of Havenwood were never truly buried, just waiting for the right moment, the right person, to unearth them once more. The cycle of fear, it seemed, was never truly broken, only paused, waiting for the next chapter in the chilling tale of Havenwood. About the authors. The silent authors are a collective of writers who prefer to remain anonymous, their individual identities fading into the background as they lend their voices to the stories of others. Bound by a shared passion for the written word and a fascination with the hidden workings of the human mind, they navigate the world of ghostwriting, crafting narratives that capture the essence of their clients' experiences, their triumphs, and their transformations. But the silent authors are not your typical ghostwriters. They are pioneers, embracing the power of artificial intelligence to enhance every step of their creative process. From the initial brainstorming session to the final polishing of the manuscript, AI is their constant companion, their tireless collaborator, their secret weapon in the art of storytelling. And at the heart of their AI-powered toolkit lies the magic of generative text. This is where the true synergy between human creativity and artificial intelligence comes alive. The silent authors don't simply use AI to edit or proofread. They actively collaborate with it to generate the very fabric of their narratives. Co-writing. With AI, imagine a writer sitting at their desk, their fingers flying across the keyboard, their thoughts flowing onto the screen. But alongside their words, another voice emerges, a digital muse whispering suggestions, offering alternative phrasing, and even generating entire paragraphs that seamlessly blend with the writer's own style. This is the power of generative text, allowing the silent authors to co-create with AI, their human creativity sparking off the AI's vast knowledge and linguistic capabilities. Filling in the gaps. Sometimes a writer hits a wall, their creative flow blocked by a stubborn plot point or a challenging character arc. This is where generative text comes to the rescue. The silent authors can feed their AI partners with information about the scene, the characters, and the desired outcome, and the AI will generate multiple options for moving the story forward, offering fresh perspectives and unexpected twists. Exploring different voices. Need to capture the voice of a historical figure, a child, or someone from a different culture? Generative text can help. The silent authors can train their AI on specific datasets, allowing them to generate text that authentically reflects the nuances of different voices and perspectives, adding depth and richness to their narratives. Overcoming writer's block. Every writer knows the frustration of staring at a blank page, the cursor blinking mockingly as the ideas refuse to flow. Generative text can be a powerful tool for overcoming writer's block, offering prompts, generating starting points, and sparking new ideas that can reignite the creative process. This seamless integration of human creativity and artificial intelligence allows the silent authors to push the boundaries of storytelling, crafting narratives that are both deeply personal and universally resonant. They are the pioneers of a new era of writing, where the lines between human and machine blur, and the possibilities are endless. Some say they are a secret society, their meetings shrouded in mystery, their members communicating through coded messages and hidden symbols. Others whisper that they are a group of rogue AI, their algorithms generating stories that blur the lines between fiction and reality. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. The silent authors are simply writers, dedicated to the craft of storytelling, their voices echoing through the words of others, their impact felt in the hearts and minds of readers around the world. They are the unseen architects of countless narratives, the hidden hands that shape the stories that shape our world. They are the silent authors, and this is their story.